This segment is brought to you by Hoosier Hanks East.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio here on this Friday, Fun Friday, and we're starting off with the man Todd Leary, the shot father from myjumpshot.com. Don't forget, go to myjumpshot.com for anyone who has a kid, knows a kid, acts like a kid, needs help on their jump shot. You know who the shot doctor is, the shot father, I rather should say. Todd, we're getting close to actually, I'm a little surprised that Malachi Moreno is making his announcement today. We're in, mid-August, and he had visits scheduled. I know he had he has a visit scheduled for September 20th at Indiana, and to set the announcement date this far out is there. It's not even that close to his season starting, so I'm a little surprised by it.
Yeah, a little surprised because it's just it goes against what a lot of kids are doing now. And a lot of kids are, when we used to say weighing all their options or trying to see what their opportunities might be, I mean, they're taking it to another level because they're being recruited by schools, for 3 or 4 years now. And it's just, it's the process for recruiting from the staff members of the universities is a lot more difficult than it used to be, especially with the NIL money situation and all that. And so, but here, I've been saying this for years, and I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often, that even with the super highly rated kids, I'm surprised more of them don't have a school where they're like, that's where I'm going. I mean, I visited there. It's a home run. It's a win, guaranteed fact. And like, I'll just throw Malachi Moreno into that discussion in that situation. I mean, he lives 20 miles from Rupp Arena. He's grown up kind of a Kentucky fan based on what I understand. His mom is insanely involved and important in watching him play basketball. I don't see any other. This is not a recruiting miss for not just Indiana, but all the other schools that recruited him. This is based on facts that surround the situation. And when you factor into it how much money Kentucky has, NIL wise and blue blood and all of that, I don't see how this is that big a shock to anybody.
No, and
he hasn't said it yet. I hope he proves me wrong, but I don't think he's going to.
I agree with you. He's been crystal balled to Kentucky, and there, like you said, I've talked about it. It makes sense, and especially with his mom. His mom is very very much a part of his life, and they are so close. I mean, They're literally a suburb of Lexington, is all that is. I talked about that very thing with his mom. His mom will be able to see every home game he plays and several away games. Well, if he's in Indiana, that's a 3-hour one-way drive. So that makes it more difficult, which I know that there are plenty of players that don't have their parents around. But if you have the opportunity to, I can understand him doing that. He probably doesn't expect or want to be in college that long, but that's a different take on it. But I was, before you joined us, with this position, I don't know that getting a freshman, unless they're a phenom, is a big deal, because you go to the portal store, you go to the center store, and you can find one that's got 1 year of college under his belt and gotten that kind of knocked the newness off, and now you can get down to the raw basketball part like he did with Kalel Ware. And so that's not a big deal. The bigger deal to me is they need to land the guys like Jalen Harrelson, who's from Indiana and is a top recruit. Braylon Mullins, who is from Indiana and a top recruit. Getting those kinds of guys are more important than landing Malachi Moreno, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think you can necessarily just look at it on paper and say, okay, well, this is the way recruiting is going to go now. And you're better off to go land transfer portal guys than you are, incoming true freshmen. And The reason is because every kid is different, and every kid, we've said this since before time, that some kids adjust differently. Some kids you think are going to adjust very well and very easily don't adjust very well from high school to college, and some adjust seamlessly. And so I don't think you can just lump it all together and say it's better to go to the portal or it's better to get high school kids. But I do think it only makes sense that you kind of sprinkle in a little bit of both. And every year that's going to be different, because every year that pool of players is a little bit different. Like the transfer portal is going to be a little bit different every year. Different guys are going to be in it just because of attrition. And so, like, you look at the guys, Indiana, the state of Indiana is in an interesting position because they have two guys that I'm going to say are pretty similar in how they play, in Sicily and Mullins. And then you add Harrelson into it. You got three guys that can play relatively the same position, and they're all the same age, and they're all from Indiana, and it just puts more pressure on. It would be so much better if those three guys were spread out, every 2 years. But obviously you can't dictate that, and you can't determine that. So it's just every year it's going to be a moving target. You're going to have to change what you do. And the best part about it is, it used to be when you missed out on recruits, I mean, you kind of knew what your roster was going to be the next year. And that's just definitely not the case anymore. Like we had no idea. We said this last year, and we will say it again next year. We have no idea what Indiana's roster is going to look like next year, because the portal just opens opportunities for it to be completely different.
Absolutely. And with those recruits that they're chasing, they don't even know right now what their needs are going to be, to follow up on what you're saying. Their needs are going to change. And the guys that they're recruiting, well, they're going to fill a void, but there will be other voids, multiple other voids.
For sure.
And so you're never going to know anyway. But I think with these guys that we're talking about, those three, it's as much about optics as it is about the talent that they bring.
Totally.
And so it's a big, the optics are a big part of it, because Indiana that's the one thing they need to get back to, is winning recruiting battles over some of these schools, because most of these guys, almost all of them, they're going up against the same programs, whether it's UConn, Kentucky, North Carolina, those schools, it's Kansas, it's every one of these guys. So they're going to have to win some of those recruiting battles with these Indiana guys and get that train rolling again.
Yeah, they are. And it is, I mean, optics is the absolute best way to describe it, in that, they're from the state of Indiana. It's exactly like what we're talking about with Malachi Moreno. We're sitting there saying, we're pretty much assuming he's going to Kentucky because he lives 20 minutes from the campus. And, I'm not necessarily saying a school in general, the whole state of Indiana, Purdue, Notre Dame, Butler, Indiana State, like all of these schools would be seriously missing out if they don't end up signing these three kids that are from the state of Indiana that are so highly rated and recruited. And so that's the part of it you got to really try to win. We get surprised when kids from the state of Maryland, choose to go to Indiana, or people from Miami like Malik Renew end up coming to Indiana. Like, you got to win those wars and those battles in recruiting. And the transfer portal just changes it, where it's not as important to win that. But I do think it's important from the optics perspective to get one of those three guys. Two would be fantastic. Three, I think, is wishing on a star. But yeah. I really think that if you get one of them, you got to feel pretty solid about it. If you get two, you crushed it.
Yeah, because not only are one from an optic standpoint, but these guys are all highly ranked players, especially Mullins and Harrelson. And so that kind of hits two birds. You're getting that in-state guy, but you're getting now this in-state high talented guy, and you're beating some other schools for it. as other people are going to look at it, well, they should. They're from Indiana, yada, yada. It's not that easy anymore. It doesn't really matter. And Russell asking, what if Indiana only gets a one-member recruiting class in 2025? What does that mean long term? Well, Todd just talked about it. You just go to the portal store, man, and start going down aisle 5 that has the wings in it, and you go down aisle 6 that has the guards, and aisle 7 that has the centers, and that's pretty much how it's going to be. That's the good thing is there's no fear factor almost with recruiting now.
100%. That is exactly right. I mean, it used to be when if these guys all announced, let's say by November, let's say they all signed and announced in the early signing period in November. Moreno's is announcing now, but let's say all 3 of the guys from Indiana announced by November. If none of them pick Indiana, or if you're Purdue, none of them pick Purdue, then you're scrambling. Like, everybody knows those were your main targets and you didn't get them. So now you're kind of settling, for lack of a better way of putting it, for other recruits, or what your roster is going to look like the next year. And that's just simply not the case anymore. And it doesn't mean your roster is going to be negatively impacted. You could very easily go out and win the transfer portal war and your team be in a better position than if you had signed those guys. Look, I use the Moneyball analogy. There's no crystal ball that tells what these guys are going to be like when they get to college. And so there is a little bit of a benefit to being able to let a kid mature for another year. Now, I will say this. I think what Trent Sicily's doing, going to Montverde, ups his level of potential. And potential for his freshman year, because all of a sudden now it's not quite like he's playing against college players every game, but it's much closer to that than it was if he stays and plays at his high school here in Indiana. And so that gives him, I think, a little bit of an extra notch on the recruiting belt, because he's going to have played against better talent than what Braylon Mullins is going to all year long. And I don't mean that negatively. Every kid makes a decision for himself that they think is the best, and I support all those decisions. When you're going to analyze who a kid's playing against, schools are going to be able to look at Trent Sicily this year a little bit differently, because they're going to watch him all season long play against top talent.
Yeah, and his situation is a little different than, say, Braylon's. Braylon, I agree with you on Braylon, but he will play a little bit higher level of competition than Trent would have at Heritage Hills, just because it's a smaller school. It's down there in out in the country in southern Indiana, which is a great place to be. Don't get me wrong. I'm from there. I love it. But the competition matters. And, the old adage, iron sharpens iron. There's truth to that. Now he's going to be practicing every day against multiple guys that are already D1 offers or commits someplace. If people don't understand how that matters, then you need to listen to us, because it matters. When you're working at a higher level every day, it starts to become permanent. It sharpens you. You can't take the shortcuts. Right now, last year he was playing in games where he's getting triple teamed because he's like the Jolly Green Giant against a lot of these teams. That ain't going to be the case against the competition he's playing and his own teammates.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, if stays, and it'll be the same way with Braylon Mullins. I don't know the schedule, but I mean, let me just guess. Let me just guess at it, and I could be wrong by a game or 2 or 3 here and there. But Braylon Mullins will probably play, let's say, 5 games this year that are against, I'll say like a Lawrence North or a Hamilton Southeastern or Fishers or a bigger school that has someone else that is rated really high. But when you look at that, there's still going to be 6, 7, 8 players on the floor that will not play in college at any point in time, at any level. And I'm only using it as an example, but when you take Trent Sicily, he's going to practice against guys every day at Connecticut and Kansas and places where where all these kids want to get to. And so it is definitely a benefit and a factor for them. Now, I am from Indiana. I'm an Indiana high school basketball fan, loved it. I grew up playing it. So yeah, it hurts, but it's the reality of where we are. And so you either accept the change or adapt or die. And I'm going to use as many Moneyball quotes as I can in our segment here today, but I mean, it's a scenario where it's just the way that basketball is today, and the way recruiting is, and the way kids have to look at it. And I think there's not a right or wrong, but I think a best scenario for each individual kid, and I think these guys are picking what's best for them right now.
I absolutely agree. And to further that, some of the teams that Heritage Hills would play during the season, Guerin Catholic, which is a smaller Catholic school up in Carmel,
but one of the better ones they would play all year.
Exactly. But then it gets to Mount Vernon, Charlestown, South Spencer, Boonville, Corydon Central, Gibson Southern. Nothing wrong with these schools. Don't get me wrong. They're just smaller and not as dominant of Tell City, Princeton. But then you look over at even Greenfield Central, where Braylon Mullins is. Well, you've got Ben Davis on here, New Palestine, Lawrence North, Jeffersonville, Newcastle. Now, Indianapolis Shortridge, I've never heard of.
You have?
No. What is that? Just a smaller school?
I could
not
be mistaken.
Southridge, Shortridge.
Yeah, I know. I could be mistaken, but I think it was a school that closed for an extended period of time, like maybe in the 80s, 90s, 2000s or something like that, and then it reopened. I could be wrong, but I think that's the case with that. And it's like Tech and Arlington and those schools that are in Indianapolis. And so, I mean, I think it's been around for a long time. I think it might have closed. I could be wrong, but I think it did.
Well, it makes sense because that not jumping off there. They also play Muncie Central, so Lawrence Central.
Do we need to take a break? I got another point I want to make. If not,
yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot more to get to. We've got the shot father with us, Todd Leary from myjumpshot.com. Make sure you go there and check that out. We're back with more right after this.
This segment is brought to you by Hoosier Hanks East.